Every evening, as the golden sunlight faded across the glass walls of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, one injured nurse quietly wheeled herself to the same window overlooking the helicopter landing pad. She never asked for visitors. She never complained about the wheelchair that had changed her life. She never spoke about the medals tucked away in a drawer no one had ever seen. Instead, she whispered the same single word every day: Sable. No one in the hospital knew who Sable was until the day an entire emergency department decided to discover why one simple name could bring a hero to tears. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center never truly slept. Even in the quietest hours, ambulances arrived, helicopters landed, and doctors hurried through polished hallways, carrying hope from one patient to the next. Among them was someone almost everyone admired. Her name was Claire Ashwood. At 35, Claire had the gentle smile that immediately put frightened patients at ease. Her shoulder-length chestnut brown hair was always neatly tied into a low ponytail. Soft hazel eyes carried a warmth that somehow made even the busiest emergency room feel calmer. Every morning, she arrived wearing immaculate navy blue rehabilitation scrubs, her white hospital ID badge clipped neatly beside her heart. Unlike most nurses, however, Claire began every shift by locking the wheels of her sleek black wheelchair beside the nurse's station. Years earlier, she had walked those same hallways without ever imagining she would one day return as a patient, and later as a nurse learning to serve in an entirely different way. No one ever heard her complain, not once. She smiled through physical therapy. She smiled through long shifts. She smiled when helping patients who often forgot she was fighting her own daily battle. Most people assumed Claire had simply been injured in an accident. Very few knew the truth, and Claire intended to keep it that way. "Morning, Claire." Charge nurse Dana Whitcomb balanced 2 coffee cups as she approached. "I brought your favorite." Claire laughed softly. "You keep spoiling me. You've earned it. I just do my job." Dana shook her head. "No, you do everyone's job." Claire looked around the busy emergency department. Doctors rushing between trauma bays, residents reviewing scans, orderlies hurrying stretchers toward imaging. The familiar organized chaos never bothered her. It reminded her why she'd chosen nursing. Helping people had always felt less like work and more like purpose. Throughout the morning, Claire moved effortlessly from room to room. She comforted a frightened elderly veteran waiting for test results. She distracted a nervous little boy before he needed stitches by teaching him how to count backwards with her. She reassured exhausted family members who hadn't slept all night. By lunchtime, nearly everyone in the department had crossed paths with her, and every person left smiling. One of the new nurses quietly leaned toward Dana. How does she stay so positive all the time? Dana watched Claire gently tuck a blanket around an elderly patient. "I've wondered that myself." Later that afternoon, physical therapist Caleb Norwood rolled beside Claire as she finished updating patient charts. "You skipped today's therapy." Claire looked guilty. "I got busy." "You've been busy every day this week." "The patients needed me." Caleb folded his arms. "And your back needs you." Claire sighed dramatically. "You sound exactly like my doctor." "I'll take that as a compliment." She laughed. "Fine. I'll come tomorrow." "You promised that yesterday." "I mean it this time." He smiled. "I know you do." Near sunset, Claire quietly finished her final patient visit. As always, she wheeled herself toward the eastern corridor. No one needed to tell her where she was going. She followed exactly the same route every single evening, past the chapel, past the rehabilitation gym, past the military memorial wall, until she reached the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the helicopter landing pad. Outside, the setting sun painted the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. A helicopter slowly descended in the distance. Claire rested her hands in her lap and watched silently for several long moments. Nothing moved except the spinning helicopter blades. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she smiled. "I hope you're happy, girl." A small pause. "I hope they take good care of you." Another pause. "I miss you." Her voice cracked ever so slightly. "Sable." She remained there until the helicopter lifted back into the evening sky. Then she quietly turned her wheelchair and headed home. She never noticed someone standing at the end of the hallway. Dana had seen everything. She hadn't meant to listen, but hearing Claire whisper that name had left questions she couldn't ignore. The next evening, Claire returned to the same window again. She watched helicopters arrive again. She whispered the same name, Sable. Dana quietly approached beside her. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Finally, Dana smiled gently. Beautiful sunset. Claire nodded. It is. You come here every evening. Claire smiled faintly. I know. Dana hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Who's Sable? Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched another helicopter disappear beyond the trees, her eyes shimmering with quiet memories. Finally, she whispered, my best friend. Dana smiled. Family? Claire slowly shook her head. No. My military working dog. Dana blinked. Your military canine? Claire nodded. For the first time in years, she began telling someone the story she'd carried quietly inside her heart. I met Sable when she was barely 2 years old. Her smile grew. She was stubborn. Dana laughed. A German shepherd? Claire nodded. The most stubborn one I'd ever met, but also the smartest. She knew when soldiers were pretending to be brave. She always found the ones who were scared. Dana listened carefully. Claire continued. I was an Army combat nurse, attached to a joint special operations medical team. My job was treating soldiers, but Sable, a tear quietly escaped before she wiped it away. Oh, she treated all of us. Dana remained completely silent. Claire looked out the window again. I've never known loyalty like hers. The conversation ended there. Claire quietly wheeled away. Dana stood frozen. She had worked beside Claire for almost 2 years. Never once had Claire mentioned military service. Never once had she mentioned a dog. And yet, judging by the way she spoke that single name, Sable wasn't simply a dog. She had been family. The following morning, Dana couldn't stop thinking about it. By lunchtime, several nurses had noticed Claire quietly staring toward the rehabilitation windows whenever helicopters flew overhead. One finally asked Dana, does Claire have family in the military? Dana slowly shook her head. I don't think that's who she's waiting for. That evening, nearly the entire nursing staff noticed Claire disappear toward the eastern corridor once more. Curiosity quietly spread. One by one, without saying a word, doctors, nurses, therapists, even several recovering veterans found themselves standing a respectful distance away. None wanted to interrupt. They simply watched. Claire rested beside the familiar window. The evening sky glowed gold once again. She smiled through tears. Softly, almost like a prayer, she whispered, I hope you're still chasing tennis balls. A tiny laugh escaped her. You never could catch them. Several nurses smiled without understanding. Claire closed her eyes. I miss you every day, Sable. The hallway had become completely silent. Even the busiest emergency department seemed to pause for a moment. One elderly veteran quietly removed his cap. Another nurse wiped away tears. Dana looked toward Hospital Director Franklin Doyle, who had unknowingly walked into the corridor moments earlier. He had heard everything. Claire finally noticed the silence behind her. She turned her wheelchair. Nearly 20 people stood watching. Embarrassed, she smiled. I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was here. No one answered. Instead, Director Doyle slowly stepped forward, his voice gentle. Claire, if you don't mind, he paused. I think we'd all like to hear about Sable. Claire looked around the hallway. Doctors, patients, veterans, nurses. Every face waited quietly. She looked back toward the sunset one last time, took a slow breath, then smiled. I suppose it's time someone knew her story. For years, she had carried the story in silence. She had convinced herself that keeping it locked away somehow made saying goodbye easier. It never had. She took a slow breath and smiled gently. You probably think Sable was just my military dog. She softly shook her head. She wasn't. She was my partner, and somewhere along the way, she became my family. No one interrupted. Even the emergency department phones seemed quieter than usual. Claire rested her hands in her lap as memories slowly returned. I joined the army because I wanted to save lives. I became a combat nurse. I thought I'd spend my career treating injured soldiers. She smiled faintly. Then, someone introduced me to a 2-year-old German shepherd who hated almost everyone. A few people laughed quietly. Claire laughed too. She barked at every new person. She ignored commands if she decided she didn't like you. And she absolutely refused to let me walk past her kennel. Dana smiled. What did you do? Claire's eyes brightened. I sat on the floor. Everyone looked surprised. I didn't force her. I didn't call her. I didn't offer treats. I just sat there for almost an hour. What happened? Claire smiled. She walked over, sniffed my shoulder, then leaned against me. That was the day we became partners. The hallway remained completely silent. Claire continued. People think military working dogs only understand commands. They understand kindness. They notice fear. They recognize patience. And they never forget the people who earn their trust. Several veterans quietly nodded. They knew she was right. Claire looked toward the sunset outside. Sable wasn't assigned to me. I wasn't her handler. I was the combat nurse attached to our joint operations team. But every mission, she found me. If we stopped for a break, she sat beside me. If I worked late in the medical tent, she waited outside. Eventually, everyone joked that Sable had chosen her own medic. A warm smile spread through the hallway. One elderly veteran spoke softly. Did she ever save anyone? Claire looked at him. Her smile slowly disappeared, more times than I'll ever know. She paused. But I always remember one. She looked toward the polished floor as if watching the memory unfold again. It was raining. Our team had just finished evacuating civilians. Everything happened very quickly. There was confusion, noise, smoke, but no one panicked, because Sable was already working. Claire smiled proudly. She found people long before any of us could. She guided soldiers toward families trapped inside damaged buildings. She never stopped. Hour after hour, when everyone else became exhausted, Sable kept searching. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Claire wasn't telling the story to impress anyone. She was simply remembering someone she loved. One little boy sitting beside his grandfather raised his hand. Claire smiled. Yes? Were you scared? Claire laughed softly. Every single day. The boy looked surprised. But you were a soldier. She nodded. Being brave doesn't mean you never feel scared. It means you keep helping anyway. The little boy smiled. I want to be brave like that. Claire smiled back. You already are. As the small crowd slowly dispersed, one person remained standing beside Director Doyle. Dana quietly whispered, We have to do something. Doyle nodded. I was thinking the same thing. But we don't even know where the dog is. Dana looked back toward Claire, who was once again watching the helicopters. There has to be a way. The following morning, something unusual happened. The nurses' station became unusually quiet, not because there wasn't work, but because everyone seemed distracted by the same thought. Where was Sable? By lunchtime, Caleb Norwood approached Dana. You've barely touched your coffee. Dana smiled. I'm thinking about Claire. She shook her head. I can't stop picturing her sitting at that window. Caleb looked toward Claire, helping an elderly patient learn breathing exercises. You'd never know she carries that kind of sadness. Dana quietly answered, That's exactly why I think we should help. That afternoon, Director Franklin Doyle quietly closed his office door. He picked up the telephone. His assistant looked surprised. I need a favor, a very important one. Several calls later, he learned that locating retired military working dogs wasn't simple. Records had changed. Handlers had retired. Military units had been reassigned. Some dogs now lived with families across the country. Others had passed away peacefully. Each answer increased everyone's anxiety. Dana whispered, What if we never find her? Doyle looked determined. We'll keep trying. Days passed. Claire noticed nothing unusual. She continued smiling, continued caring for patients, continued encouraging veterans through rehabilitation. Every evening, she returned to the same window. Every evening, she whispered the same name, Sable. One evening, Dana joined her again. Claire smiled. You've started liking sunsets. Dana laughed. I think they're growing on me. They watched another helicopter disappear into the evening sky. Dana quietly asked, "If you could tell Sable one thing, what would it be?" Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she smiled through moist eyes. "I'd tell her, thank you." Dana looked confused. "For what?" Claire quietly laughed. "For never letting me feel alone." "You really miss her?" Claire nodded. "Every day." Dana hesitated. "Do you ever wish you could see her again?" Claire smiled sadly. "Of course. But life doesn't always give us everything we hope for. I've made peace with that." Dana noticed something remarkable. Claire wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She wasn't asking anyone to fix her sadness. She had simply accepted it. Somehow, that made everyone else's hearts hurt even more. The next morning, Director Doyle received another phone call. He answered immediately. Franklin Doyle speaking. The voice on the other end sounded older, calm, professional. "Good morning. My name is Commander Elliot Griggs." Doyle sat upright. "I understand you've been looking for Sable." Doyle's heart nearly stopped. "You know her?" A brief pause. Then came the answer. "I don't just know her. I've been her family for the last 4 years." Doyle smiled with relief. "We've been trying to find you all week." "I figured." Commander Griggs chuckled warmly. "I've had calls from 3 retired handlers, 2 veterans, and somehow even 1 military veterinarian." Doyle laughed for the first time in days. "People really care about Claire. I can tell." He hesitated. "I don't want to pressure you, but there is someone here who misses Sable every single day." The commander became quiet. "I know exactly who you're talking about." Doyle frowned. "You do? I've known about Claire Ashwood for years." Doyle blinked. "You have?" Commander Griggs smiled softly. "Sable still reacts whenever she hears Claire's voice in old training videos." Doyle sat speechless. The commander continued. "When I adopted Sable after her retirement, they gave me all her records. They also told me about one combat nurse. They said, if Sable ever trusts you as much as she trusted Claire, you'll have one extraordinary dog." Doyle felt chills run down his spine. Would you consider bringing Sable here?" Silence filled the phone. Long enough that Doyle wondered if he had asked too much. Finally, the commander quietly answered, "I was actually hoping you'd ask." Doyle smiled. "You mean it?" "We'll be there." Doyle stood. "When?" Commander Griggs looked down at the faithful German shepherd resting beside his chair. Sable slowly lifted her head, as though she somehow understood. The commander smiled. "Tomorrow morning." Doyle's heart raced. He thanked the commander repeatedly before ending the call. Outside his office, Dana was waiting anxiously. She searched his face. "Well?" Doyle smiled wider than she had ever seen. "We found Sable." Dana covered her mouth. "Oh my goodness." Doyle nodded. "And tomorrow?" He looked toward Claire, helping a young veteran practice walking with crutches. "Someone very special is coming to visit." Neither of them noticed Claire smiling across the rehabilitation gym, completely unaware that after years of whispering one wish every evening, that wish was finally on its way. The next morning, long before Claire arrived for work, an unmarked black SUV slowly turned through the gates of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Inside sat a distinguished retired Navy SEAL officer. Beside him, a calm black and tan German shepherd quietly lifted her ears. She seemed to sense something unforgettable was about to happen. Morning sunlight poured across the polished driveway, reflecting off the enormous glass facade of the hospital. Inside the vehicle sat Commander Elliot Griggs, a 47-year-old retired Navy SEAL officer whose calm blue eyes had witnessed more deployments than most people could imagine. Beside him sat Sable. The beautiful retired military German shepherd rested quietly on a thick blanket, her black and tan coat beginning to silver gently around her muzzle. Her warm brown eyes calmly scanned the unfamiliar surroundings. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't excited. She simply watched. Commander Griggs smiled softly. "You've waited a long time for this, haven't you, girl?" Sable slowly looked toward him before turning back toward the hospital entrance, almost as though she already knew. Inside the emergency department, nothing seemed unusual. Claire Ashwood was already halfway through her morning rounds. She laughed with an elderly veteran recovering from knee surgery. She comforted a nervous young mother waiting outside the pediatric treatment room. She encouraged another patient beginning physical rehabilitation. As always, she gave everyone her full attention. Not once did she mention Sable. Not once did she complain. She had quietly accepted that some dreams simply remained memories. Meanwhile, Director Franklin Doyle gathered several staff members near the main entrance. Dana Whitcomb looked toward the glass doors every few seconds. Caleb Norwood folded his arms nervously. Doctors, nurses, therapists, veterans, even housekeeping staff quietly gathered nearby. No one wanted Claire to suspect anything. One young nurse whispered, "Do you think she'll recognize the dog?" Dana smiled through misty eyes. "I'm more curious whether the dog will recognize her." The automatic entrance doors slowly opened. Commander Griggs stepped inside. Sable walked calmly beside him on a simple leather leash. The moment they entered, conversations quietly stopped. Doctors turned. Patients looked up. Several veterans immediately recognized the military working dog. Sable walked with quiet confidence. Every movement reflected years of training. Commander Griggs smiled warmly. "Good morning." Doyle hurried forward and shook his hand. "Commander Griggs, it's an honor." "The honor is mine." Doyle knelt beside Sable. "So, this is Sable?" Commander Griggs nodded proudly. "Retired military working dog. Best partner I've ever had." Sable gently accepted Doyle's greeting, before calmly looking beyond him. Her ears suddenly lifted. She wasn't looking at Doyle anymore. She was staring down the long hospital corridor. Commander Griggs noticed immediately. He quietly smiled. "I think she already knows." At the far end of the corridor, Claire slowly wheeled herself toward the nurse's station, carrying patient charts. She hadn't noticed the crowd. She hadn't noticed Commander Griggs. She certainly hadn't noticed Sable. She simply continued smiling while discussing discharge instructions with another nurse. Sable froze. Every muscle became perfectly still. Her ears stood forward. Her breathing changed ever so slightly. Commander Griggs quietly unclipped the leash. He whispered only one word. "Go." Sable didn't run. She walked slowly, purposefully, as though afraid the moment might disappear if she hurried. Every person in the hallway instinctively stepped aside. No one spoke. No one moved. The entire hospital watched in complete silence. Claire handed the chart back to Dana. "Anything else before I—" She stopped. She felt something gently brush against her hand. Confused, she slowly looked down. There, standing quietly beside her wheelchair, was a familiar black and tan German shepherd. Claire blinked. For one impossible second, her mind refused to believe what her eyes were seeing. The dog simply looked at her, tail moving slowly, brown eyes filled with quiet recognition. Claire whispered, "Sable?" "Boo-hoo." The German shepherd let out the softest whine, one Claire hadn't heard in years. Sable gently rested her head in Claire's lap. Claire's hands immediately began trembling. "No!" Her voice cracked. "No." Tears blurred her vision. She carefully wrapped both arms around Sable's neck. "Oh, sweetheart." The words barely escaped between quiet sobs. "It's really you." Sable remained completely still. She simply leaned closer, closing her eyes, exactly the way she used to after every mission. Claire buried her face against Sable's warm fur. Years of longing, years of wondering, years of believing she'd never see her best friend again, all disappeared in that single embrace. Boo-hoo! Around them, not a single person remained dry-eyed. Dana quietly wiped away tears. Caleb looked toward the floor. Several doctors openly cried. Veterans removed their caps. The hallway had never felt so silent. After several minutes, Claire slowly looked up. Only then did she notice the man standing nearby. Commander Griggs smiled warmly. "You must be Claire." She nodded through tears. "And you've been taking care of her." "I've had the privilege." Claire looked at Sable again. "Thank you." "No," Commander Griggs quietly interrupted. "I should be thanking you." Claire looked confused. "For what?" The commander smiled gently. "For giving me the happiest dog I've ever known." Everyone listened carefully. When Sable retired, I volunteered to adopt her. They handed me her records. They told me about her deployments. They told me about her achievements. He smiled. "But..." Those weren't the stories they talked about most. Claire looked surprised. They talked about you. Several nurses exchanged glances. They said there was one combat nurse who treated Sable like a fellow soldier. They said you never spoke to her like equipment. You spoke to her like family. Claire quietly looked at Sable. I always thought she deserved that. Commander Griggs nodded. She did, and she never forgot. The commander reached into his jacket. He carefully unfolded an old photograph. Claire immediately smiled through fresh tears. It showed a much younger Claire sitting cross-legged on the ground. Beside her, a young Sable leaned happily against her shoulder. Claire laughed softly. I thought that picture was lost. Commander Griggs smiled. It was inside Sable's retirement file. I've carried it ever since. Claire gently accepted the photograph, her hands trembling. So many memories. Commander Griggs suddenly stood a little straighter. He looked directly at Claire. Ma'am. His voice became noticeably more formal. I served 26 years as a Navy SEAL. I've received commendations. I've led extraordinary men. But today, he paused. Today I finally get to thank someone I've wanted to meet for a very long time. Claire looked confused. Commander Griggs slowly raised his hand in a respectful military salute. The hallway became completely still. I want to thank you for your service, for your compassion, and for reminding every one of us that caring for those who serve also means caring for the ones who serve beside them. Claire covered her mouth. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. One by one, the veterans standing nearby also saluted. Then the doctors, then the nurses, then therapists, then orderlies. Even patients who could stand slowly rose to their feet. Claire looked around the hallway in disbelief. I don't deserve this. Commander Griggs smiled. Maybe that's exactly why you do. Several minutes later, the emotional moment slowly settled. Claire gently stroked Sable's silver muzzle. I know she belongs with you now. Commander Griggs nodded. She does. Claire smiled. I'm glad. You've taken wonderful care of her. Commander Griggs laughed softly. I've tried. Then he smiled. But there's something I wanted to ask. Claire looked up. What is it? He looked toward Sable, then back at Claire. Would you let us visit? Claire blinked. I don't mean today. I mean every month, every birthday, every holiday, as often as you want. Because retirement papers may say, Sable belongs to me, but family doesn't stop being family. Claire couldn't answer immediately. She simply smiled through tears, then quietly whispered, I'd love that. Sable rested her head against Claire once more, as though approving the arrangement herself. Months passed. Keeping his promise, Commander Griggs brought Sable to Walter Reed every month. The visits quickly became something the entire hospital looked forward to. Veterans smiled whenever Sable walked through the entrance. Children in rehabilitation laughed as she patiently greeted each of them. Patients who had arrived, frightened, often left smiling after spending a few quiet moments beside the gentle German shepherd. Claire no longer waited by the window alone. Now, she waited with hope, because she knew Sable would always come back. One sunny afternoon, a little girl recovering from surgery gently petted Sable. She looked toward Claire. Miss Claire? Yes? How did you teach her to love everyone so much? Claire looked at Sable for a long moment, then smiled. I didn't. The little girl looked puzzled. Claire gently scratched behind Sable's ears. She taught all of us. The little girl smiled. I hope I have a friend like that someday. Claire looked at Sable, then quietly replied, I hope everyone does. As the afternoon sun poured through the magnificent glass windows of Walter Reed, Claire sat smiling in her wheelchair, while Sable rested peacefully beside her. Commander Griggs stood nearby, talking with veterans. Doctors hurried through the corridors. Children laughed. Life continued exactly as it always had. But now, every month, one retired military K-9 reminded an entire hospital that the strongest bonds are never measured by time or distance. They're measured by loyalty, and true loyalty never forgets.
Hi, I'm Gwyneth Wynne, the owner and manager of Beyond the Silence Tales. Every evening, one injured nurse wheeled herself to the same window and whispered a single name, until an entire hospital decided to find out why. I'd really love to know what you think of this one. How did it make you feel? What stayed with me was how quietly Claire carried her grief. She never asked anyone for help finding Sable, never made her sadness anyone else's burden. It was the people around her who noticed, and who chose to act on it. Sometimes love just needs someone willing to pay attention. Which moment got to you the most? Has anyone in your life ever surprised you by quietly working to bring back something you thought was gone for good? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched you, feel free to like or subscribe for more from Beyond the Silence Tales.